can start. All right, go do that.
So, well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I know many of you, but if I've not met you, I'm Ian Lesser from GMF here in Brussels. And on behalf of GMF, it's really my pleasure to welcome you this morning to this, well, very timely, very important opportunity to hear from Cecilia Malmstrom, European Commissioner for Trade, on the challenges we face in this very critical area of transatlantic relations in, as it says in the title, turbulent times. Madam Commissioner, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We've had the pleasure of having you with us on occasions before, at Brussels Forum in particular, and we're delighted to have you again. GMF's mission, very simply, is to strengthen transatlantic cooperation in the spirit of the Marshall Plan. We're an American institution, as many of you will know, but with deep ties here in Europe, in Brussels. We have offices in 6 other European capitals. We're nonpartisan in the American terminology, but we take very seriously the values and interests that bind Europe, or should bind Europe and the United States across the Atlantic. And I think you will agree that in these troubled and troubling times, those with an attachment to this kind of multilateral, open system will have a task. And so one of the tasks is to have events like this where we can have discussions about some of the critical issues, not least trade. We don't need to say more about the role of trade in the relationship or the role of the relationship in the global trade. But, you know, just if we think in a little more historical terms and reflect on the ability of a deterioration in trade relations to jeopardize not just prosperity, but global stability is sobering. So, an important issue. There's a lot going on. We're grateful for your presence here in a very busy period. Not least, you have had concluded an extraordinary agreement with Japan, which I'm sure you'll say something about. There are ongoing discussions with China, with Mercosur partners, many things happening on many fronts, but not least you're going to Washington shortly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, you may want to say a little bit about that. Just to give you a roadmap to what we're going to do this morning, I know you have limited time, but we're fortunate we'll have you with us for some remarks, and then afterwards we'll open it up for a period to all of you for some Q&A. So, Commissioner Malmstrom, once again, we're delighted to have you with us to share your thoughts. The floor is yours.
Okay,
please.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I am so happy to be here today. Thank you for joining. Thank you to our host, the German Marshall Fund. I think you could not find a more appropriate host for a discussion such as this one, because of course the German Marshall Fund was founded as a memorial to the Marshall Plan assistance. It stands as a testament to friendship between United States and Europe, the 2 continents, the generosity of US foreign policy, and the pivotal relationship at the center of Western success in the Cold War. And this is important, not just as a memorial to our friendship, but also as a reminder of what the world looked like not long ago. Many have already forgotten. Little by little, perspectives have changed. Stories have been misremembered. The danger of memories is that they do not die suddenly. They fade, and they are distorted. And it is all in our interests to refresh them constantly. Modern liberal Europe was only possible with the help of the United States. And this was widely known once. But the generation who built the world as we know it today is dying out. Building a peaceful, democratic Europe was the purpose behind the Marshall Plan. It was part of a vision, a part of a global architecture that was meant to establish freedom, democracy at the heart of the global order. It stood against the very real threats of totalitarianism and anarchy. The generation who built this order had seen where these paths led, straight down to the trenches. They did not want to go back. Although not without faults, that plan was successful. It was a victory of hope over experience on a continent ravaged by the war for centuries. And the vision of the United States at that time did not end at a strong Europe. It was a global vision. While the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was set up to safeguard the security of the West, the United Nations aimed to foster cooperation and relation between all countries. The International Monetary Fund sought financial and monetary stability, and the GATT, and later WTO, the World Trade Organization, was established to create a stable global environment for global trade, open trade. And this approach was built on two values, one idealistic and one more realistic. The first one, human beings, we have certain common values, universal values, freedom, democracy, open trade, rule-based world order. Second, in global politics, power speaks. So this grand American design saw Europe as the second half of the liberal world order, and the design worked. Western Europe stood up as a bulwark against communism. The creation of the European community was an important way to achieve peace and prosperity after two devastating wars. And after 1991, it anchored democracy as the obvious choice for those emerging from behind the Iron Curtain. Time and time again, on the international stage, Europe and the United States stood together. Our alliance was, and still is, the envy of the world. But now the world is changing. The world is more and more dominated by new powers and emerging economies. Our alliance is increasingly tested. This year is the 70th anniversary of the launch of the Marshall Plan. So, like I said, we need to refresh our memories. We must recall that the global order as we know it cannot be taken for granted. And we must approach the challenges of the 21st centuries with the same level of ambition as Harry Truman and George Marshall once did. Together, the US and the EU are powerful enough to sustain the liberal world order. And of course, we have many partners here. And dividing at this time will only serve to weaken both of us. We need to unite. And trade would be the obvious place to start here. It is one of our fundamental economic freedoms and perhaps the very cornerstone of the relationship between countries. It spreads wealth and prosperity, builds bonds between states, and it also brings people closer together. And nowhere is this more apparent than the transatlantic relationship. For decades, this relationship has been a central artery of the world economy. It is the largest and most significant economic relationship in the world. We trade $1 trillion worth of goods and services every year. $1 trillion. The EU is by far the largest investor in the US. We account for 72% of all inward foreign direct investment in the US. But at the end of the day, what is important is not these figures, it's the impact on ordinary people. 15 million jobs are supported by the transatlantic economy. Let's reflect upon that. That's not just a number. These are 15 million individuals going to work, 15 million people supporting themselves, their families, thanks to transatlantic trade. And it goes wider than that. What matters in global trade matters also to local economies. And what matters in transatlantic trade matters to the world. The EU-US relationship is essential to the stability of trade flows. We are an example of what we can achieve when we work side by side, and we can guarantee together a future for the multilateral trading system. Recently, this system has, the stability between us has been put into question. There has been tough rhetoric linking trade and security, a link that will only serve to make us both poorer and weaker. There has been talk of trade wars between countries. But an important truth of trade is that ultimately countries do not trade, companies and people do. It is as simply as this. Countries either create a stable environment for trade or they don't. And either way, it is the general public, the citizens, who will feel the impact and the pain of every conflict. Because the world is interconnected in an unprecedented way, and in our two continents in particular. Trade balance is not like a bank balance. Wherever supply chain runs, they bring wealth and job. A car can be bought in Seattle, assembled in Detroit, having been designed by a German, built with a Mexican chassis, and Canadian engine parts. This is how trade is a win-win. And trying to do or undo these links will hurt our companies, our consumers, and the communities built around these industries. It would do untold damage to our economies, and it would damage friendship and create tensions. And it will do all that precisely at a time when we should be working on other issues. For instance, pressuring China on their unfair trading practices when it comes to global unfair overcapacity on steel, the operation of state-controlled companies, or forced technology transfer. During the past decades, we have seen a number of global challenges arise in the trade area: unfair competition, trade distortions, failures in the multilateral system. So it is understandable that the US feels the need for a decisive response. But we are concerned about the form that response has taken, blocking appointments necessary for the dispute settlement function in the WTO, imposing global trade restrictive measures on steel and aluminium and trying to justify them on national security grounds, taking unilateral trade measures against China, and using increasingly aggressive rhetoric at allies. These measures are disruptive to alliances when we should be coordinating. They work against the global order when we should be consolidating. And they undermine decades of US foreign policy and Western partnership. We don't want to escalate that situation, but we have had no choice but to respond. We are not prepared to walk away from the order we have built together and let it fade like an old memory. So we have taken action in a way that we think is reasonable, proportionate, and in accordance with international rules. Our response on the steel and aluminium tariffs has three parts. First, we have taken the case to the WTO. Illegal moves under the system need to be challenged through the system. Second, we have taken steps to assert our rights under WTO rules. We must maintain a balance of rights and obligation vis-à-vis the United States. We cannot be put at disadvantage because of unjustified tariff increases. That is fair and reasonable. So to do this, we have set of products on which to apply balancing tariffs on imports from the United States. But again, we respect the WTO rules, so the bulk of this will only apply in 3 years' time, and by then we hope that this conflict is over. Third, we need to protect the EU from the spillover effects of the US tariffs. Steel and aluminium redirected from the US could distort the EU market, further undermining EU producers who are already facing higher duties in the US. To stop this from happening, we are applying safeguards to prevent any excess steel from disrupting our markets. And this goes only to show that when you play with the global trading system principle, it creates an unstable environment. And we regret that we had to do this. But we have to protect ourselves. A large part of protecting ourselves is enforcing trading rules, because the global rule book is useless if it's not followed. And to be clear, we enforce the rules whenever they are broken and wherever they are broken. The same day we launched the WTO case against the US, we also launched a case against China on forced technology transfers. So we want to diffuse this situation as soon as possible. We need to de-escalate this before it blows up in our faces, doing harm to the transatlantic relationship, our economies, and the global order. George Marshall once said, "The only way to win a war is to prevent it." And that goes also for trade wars. There will be no winners. We have been engaging with the US to try to find a solution. I have almost lost count of my numerous calls with Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Wilbur Ross, trying to persuade him that Europe is not the source of Americans' problem in steel and aluminium. That did not work, unfortunately. And now we are seriously concerned about the new US investigation on cars and car parts under Section 232, motivated again by national security. Steel and aluminium measures turned rhetoric into reality, and doing the same on cars would create a new grim reality indeed. On steel and aluminium, the world is undeniably facing challenges as a result of global overcapacity. The root cause is China. But similar moves on cars would be disastrous. We are talking about much higher amounts of trade affected. EU exports of steel and aluminium subjected to extra duties of 6.4 billion euros. That's a lot of money. But EU car and car part exports to the US are worth more than 50 billion euros every year. And not only this, let's also remember that the US auto sector is healthy. Their exports have been rising consistently over the last decades, and so has foreign investment in US car manufacturing, including from many EU companies. In fact, many EU companies are using the United States as a platform for exporting to other countries, even back to Europe. For instance, BMW X5 model, it is only manufactured in one place in the entire world, and that's South Carolina. And the US car producers didn't ask for this. Neither did the unions, the car dealers, the US Chamber of Commerce, or the Republican Party. And why? Well, because the US car industry is so closely integrated into global supply chains, not only in North America. Ripping apart those supply chains would result in less production, less investment, and less jobs in the US. So tariff measures on cars are neither wanted or warranted. They are at best a solution in search of a problem. At worst, they are an illegal move to gain leverage in trade negotiations. And to be clear, simply looking at the metric of trade imbalances doesn't give an accurate picture of the transatlantic relationship at all. Having a gap cannot be seen as money that would be lost to other countries. The trade balance has much more to do like things from savings from the citizens, value of one's currency, consumer patterns. For instance, one moment in time when the trade deficit of the United States was shrinking quickly was during the Great Recession of 2008, because the purchasing power of the American consumers were down. But that should not make us yearn back to how our economies looked in 2008. The bottom line is that the US makes more money doing business with the EU than with anybody else. We are the top destination for American exports. We buy hundreds of billions worth of American goods and services every year. And in transatlantic trade in services, the US has a surplus. Next week, President Jean-Claude Juncker and I will travel to Washington, D.C. We will do so in the spirit of a long-standing friendship between the US and Europe. We want to try to find solutions to de-escalate the present situation, prevent it from worsening. We hope that we can find ways of working together and to advance on a positive, mutually beneficial trade agenda. We want to create additional opportunities for trade and investment. That would benefit both sides of the Atlantic. And during the quick visit in DC, I will also meet key senators, congressmen, to discuss with them, as well as representatives from business. And the message is that we are a committed global trader from the European Union, and as such, we're open to ideas about opening trade. We are prepared to think outside the box and find solutions that suits us both. So let's approach this like the allies and the partners that we are. Having said this, let's not forget that there are indeed problems in the international trading system. That we can agree upon. However, US measures on steel and aluminium will not solve the overcapacity problem in China. And the same goes for the use of the so-called Section 301, the measures that the US have taken against China on forced technology transfer. Trying to force the hand of China with illegal action will not work, and the US might end up breaking the multilateral system. Our view is that another approach is needed. We need to come together to reform and strengthen the WTO. And the strategy to modernize the WTO has three elements in our view. Reviving the dispute settlement mechanism, it has served us well. It has served the US well. Updating the rules to face the 21st century challenges. They do need updating. Improving the day-to-day work of the organization. And if we do this, we can deal with the emerging challenges in rule-based trade. And at the core, it's about keeping the system relevant and effective. And let me say a few words about how we can keep it relevant. We wrote the rule book in the WTO over 20 years ago. It has served us well, it still does, but even as we use it, we must, of course, update it. And in recent years, we have seen new challenges arise. challenges that the rules were not equipped to deal with. The first step towards solving this is opening up negotiations on new topics, such as massive state subsidies to industry, forced technology transfer, barriers for access for investment. These are important issues where we need new rules. The system was set up to deal with open and transparent traders. So we cannot let countries take advantage of that. We need to fill the gaps. We need to do so while we continue to work on the traditional issues, like subsidies to illegal fisheries, for instance, where the WTO ministers last year in December in Buenos Aires were not able to take any sort of decision to stop subsidies to illegal fishing. Global trade does not stay still. It is constantly changing. And if we want to avoid finding ourselves in a point like this again, we need to adapt to these changes, and the WTO needs to adopt. That's why we need more flexibility in the negotiations. And the way negotiations work right now is flawed. Time and again, we have seen progress held back by a small number of countries that pursue narrow, selfish interests. And as the WTO functions on consensus, we cannot move. So this approach has now shown its limits. Members must be free to move forward at different speeds, to integrate and meet criteria at different times, as long as we are following the existing rules of the WTO. And exploring this option would allow us to make progress in key areas. And this is not a new idea or a bold experiment. We had tried before, it has worked in the past. And we applied it after the ministerial in Buenos Aires last year. Groups of interested countries have already started to make progress on e-commerce, on domestic regulation in services, in investment facilitation. In all these three areas, there are a big group of member states from the WTO, from all continents, rich and poor, who come together because they realize here we need to do global work. And we want this to be integrated in the WTO system to make us more adaptable while applying pressures on the more difficult members. Gathering in groups has been a path to progress in trade for some time. We recently enhanced our trilateral cooperation with Japan and the US, and together we seek to tackle systemic problems in the global trading system. It gives us a forum to discuss ways to improve the WTO rulebook, and we hope that it will have other effects too, like showing the US that the partners are serious about reform. And this way, we hope we can build the confidence in the multilateral system again. But of course, update rulebook is half of the work. What we also need to make sure is that the rulebook is followed. So if we want to ensure that people follow the rules, we need to make sure that WTO is effective, because without enforcement, the rules are pointless. And the first step to do this, obviously, is to resolve the crisis in the appellate body. The dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO is vital. And the US needs to stop blocking the appointment of judges. The appellate body is not perfect. We are indeed open to reform the work of this body. If we truly want to tackle all distortions of the trading system, we need a dispute settlement mechanism to bring order in the global trading environment. And we also need improvement in the regular work of the WTO, in the committees and the day-to-day functioning. There need to be real rewards for complying with the rules, and there need to be penalties for those defying them. The organization needs to be much more transparent and reliable. It will not be easy, but the world global trade order is worth saving, and there are many countries out there who believe in this and who want to work with us, because this is the best way to safeguard our joint long-term interests in global trade. Because a strong rule-based approach stands against protectionism and ensures a predictable environment for all businesses, and it creates prosperity by opening markets across the world. So we are not alone here, luckily, the European Union, in putting our faith in open global trade. We have looked at our recent negotiation agenda. We have closed a trade deal with Canada. It is now working, and it has already shown some benefits. Mexico, we concluded earlier this year. Japan, we signed 2 days ago. In Japan, we hope that it will enter into force by New Year, when the European Parliament has voted as well. Vietnam and Singapore are closed. And today, I just come from, and I will go back to negotiations with Mercosur, where we're making good progress. We're also making good progress with Chile and others, and we just recently opened negotiations with Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand negotiations are going on right now, this week, here in Brussels. So this is just an example of the list. And these countries are important for economic partnership, but they're also part of a circle of friends who share values with us and who want to work together to strengthen the global trading system, who believes in the benefits of trade and who believes in multilateralism. So the international trading system is facing its deepest crisis since the end of the Second World War. The roots of these crises are deep and complex, and there are no quick fixes. But our response from the EU is clear. At home, we need to make our economy and society more resilient. We need to be strong to meet the challenges of globalization by investing in skills for changing work, moving up value chains through research and innovation, and making sure that our societies are socially inclusive and business-friendly. This is our homework. Abroad, we need to tackle the causes of international trade tensions. Doing away with WTO wouldn't solve anything. It would increase confrontation. We would return to a time for tit-for-tat tariffs and trade governed by politics, not by markets. We have seen this. We had a taste of it, and it doesn't taste good. We firmly believe that our reform plan can transform multilateral trade, and by modernizing the WTO, keeping it relevant, keeping it effective, we can get global rule-based trade back on track. The Marshall Fund shaped the 20th century by firmly establishing liberal democracy as the global order. The US achieved this with Europe as its counterpart across the water. They further shaped this order with alliances and rule setting, NATO, United Nations, IMF, WTO. Now we are at a crossroad for open global trade. It is possible that the transatlantic relationship could once again shape the global orders for the years to come. And my hope is that the US will join us in this investment, in creating rules for the good of the global community. This is the only way that we can guarantee stability in the 21st century and return to order to global open trade. Thank you very much.
Commissioner, thank you so much for that. You've given us a lot to think about, again, in very turbulent times, but we also have the opportunity, and you're very kind to stay with us for a bit of time to have some questions and some answers. So please do catch my eye, and do tell us who you are and where you're from. And for those who are not familiar with this room, the microphones are in the handrest, actually, and you don't need to turn them on. So, so there it is. And maybe if I could just go right here in the front first, please.
They're hidden. It's an IQ test.
Funny. So
there, it's hidden.
You do need to turn them on. Okay.
Tony Gardner. I used to live in this town. First of all, I want to say congratulations for the work that you're doing, the work that the Commission is doing to support the rule of law and the rules-based multilateral free trading system. My question is, you mentioned in your speech that you're going to be meeting congressmen and senators on the Hill. What is your sense? Is the mood changing? How is it changing? Is it changing fast enough? What are the arguments that you are using, you're deploying with that constituency to convince them of the logic of your argument that we are actually natural partners in a bigger problem?
Thank you very much. Nice to see you again. Well, I have been regularly meeting, of course, with the congressmen in the United States as part of my work. And even if we've had disagreements sometimes on substance, I've always felt that as a European I've been welcome, that there is a natural inclination to think that Europe and the United States are friends and partners. And if we work together, we can do a lot of things. So the notion that Europe is a foe is not something I've ever encountered at the Hill, and I hope not when I come. I'm still working on the schedule, so I don't know exactly in what order I will meet with people. But I come there with a message that we are still strong believers of the transatlantic friendship and partnership for historical reasons, but also for the future. And increasing trade tensions between us is not the solution. It's going to harm not only that strong friendship between us, but it is also going to do a lot of harm to our economies on both sides. It is going to penalize American jobs and industries as well, and this is not a good thing. And once you start escalating like this, it's very hard to step down. And instead, we should be working together. I mentioned on WTO. I know that there's a lot of criticism towards the WTO in the US. Some of that criticism is fair. Let's look at it and try to see how we can advance together. And let's see how we can work together to address one of the main concerns in the US is certain development in China. We share those concerns, and we conveyed them at the last summit with China. But we don't share the methods that the US are addressing them with. So let's see how we can work together bilaterally, but also in different global forums, in G20, in the Global Steel Forum, in other forums, how to address these issues. And let's not impose tariffs lightly to each other for strange reasons, because they cause a lot of harm and damage that are very, very difficult to repair afterwards. So we come there, to try to see how can we work together. Can we increase our trade? You know that we had discussions on the free trade agreement with the US for a long time now. That particular TTIP, you've even forgotten what the name was. TTIP. And is not on the table anymore. But is there anything else we can do to facilitate trade? That would be the way to address it. So let's see. This will be one occasion to meet them. It is not the first, and it's certainly not the last. So I will continue to have dialogue with elected representatives, with business communities, with civil society in the US, because the US has a lot of stakeholders, and I think it's important to talk to all of them.
Thanks very much. Speaking of TTIP, I recall we had in this room an extraordinary discussion with Mike Froman at one time, and it seems like a lost golden age or something. But anyway, that wasn't an easy discussion either, and but there it was. If I could go just on the aisle, right? Well, the near aisle. I think it's one seat in. Yes, please.
Lady over there. Yes. Hi. Where is it?
It should be. They tell us they turn it on. So.
Now I think. Yes?
Yep.
Yeah. Now I can hear you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you very much indeed. Shada Islam from Friends of Europe. Commissioner, thank you very much for a very, very important speech. And I think you've laid out some of the biggest challenges Europe faces today. I want to take you up on the reform of the WTO that you've talked about. Very important, and about time we did that. But I think you'll agree with me, Commissioner, that you cannot do it. Even if the US were to come back in a more constructive mood, you cannot do it just with the US. Times have changed. So I was just wondering, who would you turn to? You've talked about the like-minded countries, but you haven't talked about India or China as part of this like-minded group. And you cannot get things done in the WTO without these two countries on board. So I was just wondering, what are your plans? How will you play out in the coming days? Because this reform is crucial, as you've said yourself. Thank you.
No, I fully agree with you. If you just hang around with like-minded, you get a nice and comfortable view of the world, but that is not going to change it. So, of course, we discuss with like-minded. That group is quite big. I was recently in Geneva. There is a sort of informal group there called the Friends of the System, which consists of 55 countries from all over, big and small, and also countries with whom we don't normally engage on these issues, because they truly believe in the WTO system. And we discussed there with them, and we try to exchange some views, and everybody's doing some thinking as well. There are regular meetings also on different levels on this. As I said, we just came back from China at the EU-China summit, and the Chinese have agreed to set up a working group with us on reforming the WTO. And this has been agreed on the highest level. And we will discuss the parameters of this. And I mean, everything is on the table. We have said that we want to discuss the reform of the rules. and some of these rules do concern China, but it's also in their interest that we talk about them together. But also some of the issues that I mentioned, they might have other concerns that they want to discuss. So, I mean, we haven't made up the agenda yet, we just decided. So that would be a very important platform to test some ideas and to see how far we can come. Then the WTO countries regularly meet, of course, to discuss these issues in Davos, and then the ministerials in the framework of OECD meetings and so on. So we need to continue to talk to everybody on this. On India, we haven't reached out specifically. They hosted an event, I think almost a year ago, on WTO to have first discussions on reform. They were not conclusive, but at least I think they are engaging as well. So we need to find ways to look at them as well, because India, of course, is one of the countries who have a lot of problems with the WTO, and sometimes we have problems with their problems. But they need to be on board, of course, because they are the key to unblock some of the old Doha issues, development, and so on, and we absolutely need to have India and other countries on board to see how we can unblock the situation and move forward.
Thank you. Just right over there by the door, if we can get you to a microphone, that would.
Okay, well, creative solutions. Out-of-the-box solutions here. Commissioner, you mentioned the out-of-the-box solutions with the United States. Is a plurilateral car deal something that you could think that could work in your discussions also with other partners like China, like South Korea, Japan, that would need to be on board? Could this possibly work, or should we unilaterally lower the car tariffs or something to appease the United States? And just on the good progress with Mercosur, if you allow, I think it's a long shot to expect that the talks would wrap up today, but do you think it can possibly be done before the summer break or the Brazilian elections, or are we looking more something towards the end of the year or even later? Thank you.
Thank you. On this plurilateral idea that is circulating around the world, this is one idea of many. And for it to work, you would have to include the mass of the big car producers. Would have to agree on that. I don't know if they do. Maybe it's worth exploring, but it's not sort of a solution, the agenda we come with to President Trump. It is one idea of many. I don't know if it would work at all. So let's see, just bilateral taking away car tariffs between the EU and the US. Well, it will have to be broader, of course, because this you cannot do, because these are based on most favored nation basis. So if you don't include it in a broader trade agreement, you will have to do it for the rest of the world. And I don't think that the big car-producing countries in this world will, unilaterally do this, because we'll have a lot of free riders across the world. And it would also damage the work we have done in some of our bilateral trade agreements with important partners. So thinking outside the box, yes, we are thinking. And if you have any ideas, you're welcome. But there's not sort of, this is the solution we propose. I think the aim of President Juncker's visit is to try to establish a good relation, try to see how we can de-escalate the situation, avoiding it from going further, and see if there is a forum where we can discuss these issues. I mean, I think the time is very short, so we're not expected to solve all the solutions, and there's a lot of things that the White House want to discuss as well. But hopefully a good first meeting that could lead to something on a longer process. On the Mercosur, well, we spent the whole day yesterday. The ministers are in town and started very early this morning, and I will leave you to go back on this. We are making good progress. We are absolutely attacking some of the very difficult questions. There's still a long list to deliver, so it's not that we will have a call for a press conference at 4 o'clock and declare that we're done, but maybe 5. But I hope that we can make a lot of good progress, and by the end of the day, we will outline with the ministers the way forward. We are very close, but I don't want to give you a date because I did that before and I was wrong.
If I could go just on the other side, just on the aisle. Yes, red jacket, please.
Hello, Commissioner Malmstrom. My name is Amy Paul from German television ZDF. I have a question concerning the recent steel measures by the EU. Is the EU escalating the trade war with the US by imposing new EU safeguards on steel?
Thank you. Yes, we just decided to have provisional safeguards on some of our steel industry. This is based on an investigation that started in March. So we have provisional results from that, but the investigation will continue until the end of the year, where we will decide whether to make them permanent or not. These safeguards are based on historical flows, so it's TRQs, for those who are familiar with that. So we hope that they will not distort the traditional trade and sort of impose new restrictions, but protect our steel companies from the steel that was intended for the US and is now coming and distorting the markets. You are entitled to do so. According to the WTO, we have followed all the rules here. They are provisional, entered into force, I think, the 18th of July. I don't think they're omnes, so it's all countries, but they are based on traditional flows, so in order to minimize the damaging, the protectionism of this. And this we have to do. It's a response to protect our industry from something that we think is deeply unfair.
I'm conscious of your time, but perhaps we take two more and we're okay? Okay, good. Please.
Thank you very much. Hello, Jana Dreyer from Border Lakes. Commissioner Malmstrom, what if the meeting goes wrong? What's the plan B should things go not very well with the United States in the coming days and weeks? Even more retaliation? I mean, can this continue to escalate or not? What about the WTO if the blockage continues? Is there a plan to make it work despite the US? What's the thinking on, the worst case scenario? Where does the Commission want to take the EU on board? Because the work that has been proposed is very constructive, but it's a long-term endeavor. But what happens if things really go wrong? Thank you.
Well, I don't want to speculate about this meeting. It's a meeting between two leaders. They meet and they discuss. They have met many times before, so they're not new to each other. We've known from the past that these meetings can be a bit unpredictable, but we come there with the best intentions and as friends and allies, and with the true willingness to start a dialogue on how we can de-escalate this situation and to express our concerns about a possible decision to impose car and car parts tariffs that are now under investigation. Then we will see what comes out of that meeting. That is certainly only beginning of hopefully a process where we can continue to discuss. Me and my colleagues, we have lots of contacts also with other members of the American administration and government. So discussions are there. On if this would escalate, if the US would impose these car tariffs, that would be very unfortunate. But we are preparing, together with our member states, a list of rebalancing measures there as well. And this we have made clear to our American partners, and we will continue to make that clear. That list is still under preparation, but it is done in the same way as with the steel and aluminium. The discussions on how to reform the WTO and so on, they go on. We have a working group with USTR, Mike Froman's successor, Ambassador Lighthizer, and the minister from Japan for Industry and Trade, Minister Seko. That goes on, and that is constructive. We are making progress there. The discussion that we have with other partners on how to reform the WTO, we are working on some papers that we will share with member states shortly, so that we can go out and have a more systematic outreach to others, and that will continue. Of course, we want the US to be on board in that work, and that is also a message that we will convey. But the rest of us are determined enough to save this system, and that work will continue.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps there are a lot of hands, and we're obviously not going to get to all of you, but two more. Maybe we take two together. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Why not? So, yes, please. And then I'll go right behind you in the back. So.
Ignasi Guardans, Transatlantic Business Council. By a kind of natural geometry, the more there's tensions with the United States, the more it looks that we need partners in China. And in the fact, the EU is working with China, at least at the WTO and in other areas. So what are your red lines? Because we do know that China, of course, is very interested in engaging as much as possible with the EU. So, you know, you feel in between, in a way, geographically, in between China and the United States. You cannot, at the same time, the EU does have, of course, its own conflicts with China. How do you position yourself, and what are your red lines in terms of engaging with China?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think yes, please. Yep, just standing, I think you are in the back. Yes, lady, right there. Yeah. If you can get to a microphone. Well, maybe someone right in front of you will lend you one, or speak loudly.
Great. Thank you very much, Joanna Sopińska, MLEX. Commissioner, obviously you are consulting with the member states on your visit to Washington. What room of maneuver do you have? What sort of mandate did you get from the member states regarding what you want to achieve in Washington? Are you ready to open proper negotiations next week, or it's going to be just an introduction to this? Thank you.
Thank you. Please, yes, and one more, indeed. Absolutely. Please, just right here.
Thank you. Emre Peker with the Wall Street Journal. On the both on the trilateral, you're now engaged in the scoping exercises. I'm curious as to what you hope to achieve in the working group with China, and how confident are you in China's engagement for WTO reform? Is this a real effort? Will the EU play a bridge role between the trilateral with the US and Japan on one hand, other partners on the other, and China on yet another? Or is this just an effort by China to try and take some heat off and counterbalance and find some allies to stand side by side as it comes under attack from Trump tariffs? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll answer the China question jointly. The European Union is not taking sides between the US and China. We have some concerns, and I think I was very clear about the US latest measures and the tensions in our relations. But we equally have new and old concerns with China. As I said, we took them to the WTO on the transfer of technology that we don't agree with. We do not agree with, we know that they have made some progress on overcapacity, but there's far from enough. They need to do much more. There are concerns on cyber theft and others. And that we have conveyed to China, together with all our traditional concerns that we have, the massive state subsidies, the problems that our companies have to act on an equal basis on the Chinese market, human rights concerns we always convey. But we do also have an interest, of course, in trying to deepen our relations with China. We have, since a long time now, been talking about an investment agreement. For the first time, we exchange offers. That is a progress. We are now analyzing this offer because quite thick papers we received just a couple of days ago. But that is a move forward. And the purpose of the investment agreement is to create a more level playing field for our companies that they really want. China announcing that they wanted to be part, that they wanted to work with us on WTO, I think it's a positive step. That should be welcome. We'll see. I mean, it was just only announced. We will have to look at the outcome of this. I think China is really honest in its wish to preserve and strengthen WTO. It doesn't always follow the WTO rules, but as a rule, I would say that they try to be constructive in WTO. And I think it is in their interest, in their true interest, to have a functioning WTO where they can work, where they can be a part. And if they want to work with us to reform and update some of the rules that will concern them, I think that is absolutely something to exploit. And we were willing to try. Will it succeed? I don't know, but it's always worth a try. And that I think partly answered Ignacio's question. I mean, we are engaging with China as we have always done. Now we see that there is an increased concern in China also over the future of the global trading system, WTO, and what the US are doing to them. I've said that we share the US concerns on China. We don't share the methods that they are addressing them on 301, for instance, and on steel neither. But the root causes of some of the problems on the trade system are to be found in China, and there we need to work with others and with China to try to reform them. On the White House visit, Joanna, where are you? On the White House visit, we don't go there to negotiate anything. To negotiate, we need a mandate. We don't have a mandate to negotiate anything because we don't know what we would potentially negotiate. As I said, the president goes there with an open mind to establish, hopefully, or to build on a relationship that is already there and see if there is a way that we can engage. That hopeful result of a talk will then have to be brought back to member states if there is any mandate needed. But at least to start talking, to try to see if we can de-escalate the situation, to see if there is a way that we can start talking about facilitating trade between us without the threat of tariffs. That would be a good outcome. Then, if that needs a mandate, then of course, as always, member states need to be consulted and give their consent on that. We keep very close contact with all the member states on this. I think as late as yesterday night, there was a Coreper meeting where the ambassadors were debriefed on the latest of the meeting, and they will be debriefed the day after as well when we come home. So there is absolutely no conflict there. And to go and talk and to see, I think everybody appreciates that it's an effort we should try to do. But we'll see. Maybe there will be no outcome at all, and then we will have to discuss what to do.
Madam Commissioner, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for dealing with the questions in such an open and frank way. Please join me in thanking our speaker today. We hope to have you with us again soon. We hope to have all of you with us again soon. Thank you for being with us here. We wish you a very good summer. We wish you a very good trip. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for organizing this. Thank you to our host. Thank you for organizing this. Thank you to all of you for being here. I think we can say to be continued, no?
I think so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci, bonjour, vous allez bien?